Today we continue with Chapter 2. In this chapter, we will learn how to define communication, compare communication models, and examine the essential ingredients of effective communication. And lastly, we'll learn how to audit communication to identify areas for improvement. And Chapter 2, brushing up on business communication fundamentals. Even without formal training, you've managed to communicate from the day you were born, and maybe even before then, to get what you wanted. All you had to do was express your distress or discomfort, and you'd send caregivers scrambling to feed you, hold you, or change the diaper. Since that time, you've had plenty of formal training and education to sharpen your skills, like classes in reading, writing, and speech. In short, you know how to communicate. So why would you need guidance on business communication fundamentals? The reason is simple. A conceptual understanding of the fundamentals ensures that your communication is as effective and efficient as possible, and that you are both understanding others and being understood without having to exhaust everyone involved with frequent. The reason is simple. A conceptual understanding of the fundamentals ensures that your communication is as effective and efficient as possible, and that you are both understanding others and being understood without having to exhaust everyone involved with frequent repetition and clarification. An understanding of what communication encompasses and the various components that enable it can make you a more effective and efficient communicator. In this chapter, I provide you with several definitions of communication to work with, several standard models, and a list of key components so that you have a clear understanding of everything required for communication to occur. I even provide guidance on how to conduct a communication audit so you are well equipped to analyze your daily conversations and identify areas for improvement. Checking out definitions of communication. Remember, given that communication focuses on exchange information and establishing mutual understanding, you'd think it would have one clear-cut definition that everyone agrees on. That's not the case. There are multiple definitions and they are not mutually exclusive. Celebrate the fact that most words have multiple meanings. Oh, this is part. Remember to celebrate the fact that most words have multiple meanings. That's what makes language so rich. In fact, knowing the various definitions of communication that I present in the following sessions give you a broader understanding of what communication is all about. Let's start with dictionary definitions. Merriam-Webster's collegiate. I need to check. Collegiate. Merriam-Webster's Collegiate Dictionary contains five definitions related to human communication. First, an act or instance of transmitting information communicated, a process by which information is exchanged between individuals through a common system of symbols, signs, or behaviors. Fourth, a system for communicating, like telephone or Wi-Fi, a technique for expressing ideas effectively, as in speech. And we have a textbook definition. Back in the 1960s, communication researchers Katz and Khan, I hope I pronounced their names right, define communication as the exchange of information and the transmission of meaning. They claimed that for communication to take place, someone has to send information to someone else who needed to receive and understand it. Not bad for a definition from the 60s, but I and many of my colleagues would quibble with it. I say communication happens whenever information is transferred, but that successful communication occurs, and that successful communication occurs only when the recipient understands the meaning of that information. I agree. To fully grasp the distinction, think back to an incident in which you heard what someone told you but didn't fully understand the intended meaning. The speaker transferred information to you, so communication occurred, but the communication was unsuccessful because you and the speaker didn't reach a mutual understanding. A practical definition for business applications. To ensure that your communication is effective, I encourage you to embrace an outcome-based definition of communication. I define communication as an exchange of information that drives action. Let's read this again. I define communication as an exchange of information that drives action. Action can range from increasing a person's understanding to persuading them to do something. Here are a few examples. Like a customer buys a product based on your sales presentation. You receive a promotion based on a performance conversation with your direct supervisor. Your supervisor understands why you're upset about having your time off request denied based on a brief conversation you had. Communication isn't merely about the message, it's about the impact the message has on the recipient. Agree. What it causes the recipient to think, feel, or do. So remember that communication is effective in a business environment when it initiates action or change. In the process of communicating, understanding can evolve. Communication is a foundation of relationship building and is multidirectional. For example, as you attempt to persuade someone else to accept your viewpoint, you may also find yourself persuaded to think differently based on theirs. Agree. Exploring communication models. A communication model is a simplified representation of the exchange of information and meaning. Numerous scholars and researchers in the communication field have proposed various communication models over the years. These models can be broken down into three categories: linear, interactive, and transactional, all three of which I cover in the following sessions. Sorry, and not sorry, for donning my professional hat as I take you on a deep dive into communication models. Understanding these models and the components of communication they highlight is important, especially in a business environment, because it enables you to identify key factors that contribute to effective communication. Let's start with the first one, linear models. The earliest and simplest communication models are linear. According to these models, communication flows in one direction and involves only four elements. The first element is sender, the person who sends the message. The second element is the message, or the information being conveyed. And the third element is the channel, or the mechanism used to transmit the message, such as phone, radio, or television. And the last element is the receiver, that is the person, that is the person who receives the message. Shannon and Weaver, engineers at Bell Telephone Labs, came up with one of the more popular linear communication models that has been adapted for the study of human communication, as shown in figure 2.1. So we've got here figure 2.1, Shannon and Weaver model of communication. We can see four elements here, starting with the sender, and sending the message. Got the sender, sending the message through a channel to the receiver. Okay, not rocket science at all. So it's pretty straightforward. Sorry. The second model is called interactional models. As researchers studied communication more and tested the elements of the linear model, they realized that communication doesn't flow in just one direction. In fact, communication can be a dialogue involving two people who share messages back and forth. The models that emerged from this line of thinking were categorized as interactional models. According to interactional models, communication involves messages sent back and forth between sender and receiver during the course of a conversation, and sometimes over different communication channels, creating a communication history, like in figure 2.2. So we can see here in figure 2.2 an interactional model of communication. We have two people, person A and person B, and there are a lot of messages, and we can see different channels they use to communicate with each other, such as text messages, and they call, and they send emails, and they can talk in person. And the third model is transactional models. Transactional models of communication describe communication as an ongoing process in which participants exchange information and develop understanding within a context, like in figure 2.3. Instead of being labeled as senders and receivers, participants are communicators, and both are responsible for exchanging information and influence, often communicating with one another simultaneously. So let's look at figure 2.3, a transactional model of communication. So we have the communication happens all within the context, and we have two communicators or two people who participate in this communication. We have feedback, we have message and receiver and different channels, and we also have noise. So, and we can see the feedback, we have the loop, and so it is keep going on, and everything happens within one certain context. Wait a minute, you can send and receive at the same time? Yep, you sure can. Think about it. When you convey a message and someone is listening to you, that person is simultaneously conversing with you non-verbally. As I explained in greater detail in chapter 3, if they furrow their brow to convey confusion, you may alter your communication on the spot to clarify. So remember, transactional models are the most complex and precise, though The linear and interactional models simply have one or more messages being exchanged between sender and receiver over one or more channels. Transactional models account for additional elements, including feedback, context, and noise, as described in the next session. Let's look at this one. Okay, so we have one example, I guess. So I've got here one cannot not communicate. Oh, a difficult name, or many difficult names here. Watzlawick, I think so. Watzlawick, Bayflas, and Jackson, who outlined their interactional model in their 1967 book, Pragmatics of Human Communication, Norton and Company, blew the minds of readers by claiming that one cannot not communicate, that people communicate as soon as they begin to interact with one another, whether intending to or not. In other words, everything you say and everything you don't say in word, posture, gesture, facial expression, and absence thereof sends a message. Consider, for example, an email you haven't responded to yet. That silence, your lack of response, communicates a message. So the question to ask yourself at all times is, are you communicating what you intend to be communicating? Good question. If you ghost someone, for example, what message are you sending? What meaning and emotion you're trying to convey or evoke? Wow. In a business context, what does a lack of intentional communication say to others? If you're a manager who fails to respond to your team members in a timely fashion, how are they likely to interpret your lack of communication? When you're not sending a message, you're leaving the meaning of that unsent message wide open for interpretation and misinterpretation. Very, very, very important note here. Now, let's move on to the next part of the chapter. We've got recognizing the elements of communication and why they matter. When people are communicating with one another, they tend to focus on the message. People often assume that if the message is clear, the communication will be effective. Unfortunately, communication is more complicated than that. Multiple elements contribute to determining communication success. Communicators, sender and receiver. In linear and interactional communication models, the sender encodes the information in a form that can be understood, for example, language, images, video, and the receiver gets the information from the sender and decodes or interprets it. In transactional models, all participants send, receive, code, and decode messages simultaneously. Each communicator's knowledge, personality, communication skills, and other qualities impact communication success. Message. The message is the information, meaning, or feeling that the sender constructs to convey information or meaning to, or evoke a response from the receiver. It must be clear to both sender and recipient to convey the intended meaning or evoke the desired response. Channel. The channel is the medium used to convey the message. It may be face-to-face communication, video conference, email, text, video, another medium, or a combination of media. The channel has a significant impact on the information exchanged and the speed and synchronicity of transmission. See Chapter 4 for more about choosing communication channels. Feedback. Communication isn't just linear. It includes a feedback loop that describes the circular and synchronous nature of communication. The feedback loop's effectiveness and efficiency affect the ability of communicators to exchange information, collaborate, and achieve mutual understanding. Context. The situation or setting can impact the message and how it's conveyed and interpreted. Communication doesn't occur in a vacuum. Physical, psychological, social, cultural, and relational contexts all influence how communicators exchange information and understand one another. So remember, the less two people have in common, the greater the communication challenge. Imagine two people speaking different languages, being raised in vastly different cultures, or even working in totally different industries, trying to establish a shared understanding of a complex topic that one of them is familiar with and one is not. And the last element is noise. Noise is anything that blocks or impairs sending, receiving, or understanding. For example, external or environmental noise can prevent people from hearing one another. And internal noise, for example, being distracted by a problem unrelated to the current conversation, can prevent people from processing the information they are hearing. Proceed to the next session to find out more about noise and how to reduce or eliminate it. Remember, all these elements are interrelated. For example, context impacts how communicators present and interpret information. The choice of channel, for example, email versus face-to-face, affects the feedback loop. What one communicator thinks about the others influences the message and can be a source of noise. All elements must work in concert to ensure effective and efficient communication. Identifying and addressing sources of noise. Noise is anything that detracts from the transmission, meaning reception or understanding of a message. That's not only a physical sound that makes hearing difficult. In this session, I present 4 common sources of noise, all of which can impair communication success and provide guidance on how to reduce noise from each source. Tip here is, be more mindful of noise. The greater your awareness of different sources of noise interfering with your communication, the more likely you are to notice and address it before it has a chance to impair your message. Very important tip, I think. Quieting physical noise. Physical noise is anything in the environment that can interfere with communication. It can be a sound such as sirens from emergency vehicles, or even something that can be seen, smelled, tasted, or felt. For example, a room being uncomfortably hot, cold, or crowded. So the tip here is, whenever you are in a meeting, regardless of whether you are leading it, take note of any sources of physical noise and do your best to address them. For example, if you feel uncomfortably warm, you may ask whether anyone else is feeling the same way. If they are, you can request that the thermostat be adjusted or request to hold the meeting somewhere else. Calming the sources of psychological noise. Psychological noise consists of thoughts and emotions that interfere with the mental processing of information. In other words, it's all in your head or the heads of the people you're trying to communicate with. If you're the one who's distracted, you can do something about it immediately by focusing on the message you are delivering or receiving and blocking out everything else. If shifted your focus isn't possible, consider taking a time out and dealing with whatever's distracting you and then returning to the conversation or meeting later. Most people would rather you excuse yourself than engage in the conversation in a distracted state of mind. If other participants are distracted internally, you face a more daunting challenge because you can't read minds. If you're communicating face to face or via video conference, you may be able to sense distraction by observing nonverbal cues. You can then confront the person courteously, for example, by asking if everyone is on the same page and able to engage. Take time to refocus the meeting or conversation and bring everyone back to the current discussion. The tip here is if you know that someone may have trouble focusing for whatever reason, and assuming the conversation can wait, you can always say something like this. I know you have a lot on your plate right now. Is this a good time to discuss project updates? Or would it be easier to focus on the conversation more if we spoke tomorrow? If the conversation can't wait, say something like this. Try saying something like this. I know you have a lot on your plate right now. I need for you to switch gears for 10 minutes so that we can iron out the project updates that I'll communicate to the team tomorrow. Alleviate semantic noise. Semantic noise comes into play when communicators speak different languages, dialects, or interpret words, phrases, or information differently. It can also result from the use of acronyms that not everyone is familiar with and from grammatical errors that alter the intended meaning or how others perceive the person who made the errors. Have you ever been in a meeting in which someone is trying to use big words to try to impress people, but they're pronouncing the words incorrectly or using them in a wrong context? Yep, that's also an example of semantic noise. Big words may be sexy, at least from this author's perspective, but only when used correctly in appropriate situations. Most often, in business meetings, the simplest, clearest word is the best. So the tip here is to reduce semantic noise, define key terms, spell out acronyms at first usage, and check in regularly during the conversation or meeting to ensure that everyone is on the same page. Here's an example of defining a key term. When I mention the leadership team today, I'm referring to those in the organization who are at a VP level or above. You can check to make sure everyone is on the same page by saying something like, before we move on to the next topic, I want to summarize where we are. Bonus points for letting someone else provide the summary so that you can truly check for understanding. Mitigating hierarchical noise. Hierarchical noise may occur when people at different levels in an organization communicate with one another. In other words, when one person has more power than the others. For example, you may interpret the message differently depending on who sends it. If your supervisor tells you this needs to be done today, you may interpret it as an order or command. Whereas if one of your teammates presents it to you, you may interpret it as a statement or opening to a conversation. So the tip here is, here are a few ways to reduce hierarchical noise in your organization, assuming you are in a position that empowers you to do so. First way, build a collaborative culture. Organizations that have a strict hierarchical culture are more prone to hierarchical noise. Other corporate cultures are less structured and more focused on collaboration and results than on status and power. Check out Company Culture for Dummies by Mike Ganino and published by Wiley for more about various corporate cultures. Streamline communication channels. Encourage direct communication among everyone in the organization rather than require that communications to be filtered through hierarchical layers. Encourage open, honest communication. Reward rather than penalize members of your organization for speaking their minds, pitching ideas, and revealing opportunities for improvement. Reducing noise in virtual environments. With the increased frequency of virtual meetings and digital communication channels, reducing noise in these environments has become increasingly important. When you are sending a message in person, noise is more obvious, making it more likely to be addressed. In a virtual environment, you may have nothing to clue you in on the fact that noise is interfering with the transmission, reception, or processing of information. Here are a few tips for reducing noise in virtual environments. First one, prepare your audience. When sending digital media to one or more people to process, let them know what they are getting and your expectations. For example, if you're sending a 3-minute video, tell the recipients how long it is, what you want them to do after viewing it, like this. I need everyone to take 3 minutes, uninterrupted, to focus on this video. Respond with your answers to the questions posed at the end. Please make sure to set aside the appropriate length of time to complete this task by noon tomorrow. Avoid technical glitches. Provide detailed instructions on the software or platform you are using to host a virtual meeting or presentation, including how to access the software, how to sign in, and how to navigate to the meeting. Encouraging participants to sign in early and let you know if they anticipate encountering any issues that may prevent them from participating. For example, they won't be near their computer, they don't have the software, they've had problems using the software in the past. The tip here is to consider offering participants the option of connecting with you outside the meeting to work out any possible technical glitches prior to the scheduled meeting. A brief dry run can ensure that when the time comes, everyone can sign in and participate. Specify any environmental guidelines. When scheduling a meeting in a virtual environment, establish guidelines for the meeting ahead of time so that people know how to prepare. For example, our meeting tomorrow requires everyone to be fully focused for 30 minutes so that we can discuss our expansion plans. I know many of you work from public places, but we have confidential matters to discuss, so please be sure to call in from a private, secure environment. Lay out the rules for questions and conversations. For virtual meetings, clarify how you'll handle questions and side conversations. For example, you may say something like this. For today's presentation, I ask that everyone remain on mute and keep their cameras turned on. If you have questions for the speaker, enter them into the chat and we'll address them at the end. We want to make sure our presenter today can share the content clearly and with unnecessary interruptions. Paying special attention to history and environment. One of the most challenging aspects of understanding communication is that it's about more than just the people in the room and the topic under consideration. Numerous factors influence how information is communicated and processed, as explained earlier in the session recognizing the elements of communication and why they matter. In this session, I take a deeper dive into two key elements that contribute to the context in which communication commonly occurs. Common communication history and environment. Communication history. Communication history consists of all the interactions, messages, impressions, perceptions, and bits of information that participants have shared among one another over time. It extends beyond the current topic of discussion to the history of their relationships with one another. For example, if one participant in a discussion has a reputation of exaggerating the facts or using rhetorical tricks to persuade others, any information or opinion they put forth is likely to be challenged or rejected outright. Take, for example, a colleague that you've gotten along well with for more than a year. Then one day their communication style seems terse, overly direct, and borderline rude. This isn't the history you have with the person, so you are able to take a breath and recognize that it's outside the norm. Later that day, you find out that they had a family medical emergency and were overly stressed. The communication style had nothing to do with you and everything to do with the situation. On the other hand, if you have no communication history with someone and make a poor first impression, it takes significantly more work to get back on a positive track. Communication history can even exist when you've never even shared a single word with a person. As you read the following possessions, you want to notice what immediately comes to mind. University professor, used car salesperson, financial advisor, kindergarten teacher. What immediately came to mind is the stereotype that you have for that role, which can be based on your personal experience, depictions in media, and other societal factors. That stereotype can influence, rightly or wrongly, your communication history with someone before you've even had your first conversation. Is it fair? Not necessarily. Is it real? Sure is. That is why you're well advised not to burn bridges, ruin relationships, connections, or opportunities over the course of your career. If you burn even one proverbial bridge, word spreads, chipping away at your reputation and impairing your ability to form positive relationships. So this is a big warning. Be very careful about everything you put out into the universe. All your personal and professional interactions, your blog posts, everything you share on social media platforms and so on, anything that can be shared in any way, digitally, on paper, by word of mouth, can become part of your communication history with others, including potential future employers. Pay attention to the information that's out there about you and make sure it aligns with the impression you want to make. Environment. Environment can have a significant impact on not only the content of the information being communicated, but also how the audience perceives and interprets it. For example, you wouldn't talk about the same topics in a meeting at work that you talk about at a company picnic. One setting is professional and the other is less formal. Asking about a raise or promotion at a company picnic, for instance, would probably compromise your chances of getting either. In any situation involving communication, and that's every situation when you are in the presence of others, consider the environment. Here are some questions that can help you guide your evaluation. Is this an appropriate environment to discuss the topic or issue? Is everyone comfortable? For example, make sure the room has sufficient space and isn't too hot, cold, or stuffy. Can the topic be covered in the allotted time? If a meeting is rushed, it can impact the ability to successfully convey the information or message. Is the environment free of noise and other physical distractions? See the earlier session of quieting physical noise for details. So remember, in the workplace, meetings and conversations increasingly take place via virtual channels. These venues have environmental considerations as well, including whether all participants have the technology required to fully participate, whether audio or video is turned on or off, whether participants can interact via chat, and so on. Pay attention to variables in virtual environments as well. Conducting a communication audit. A communication audit is a systematic process used to evaluate how effective and efficiently information and meaning are being exchanged. You can conduct an audit before, during, or after a communication session or project to identify and address areas for improvement. To conduct a simple communication audit, evaluate the conversation or presentation based on the effectiveness of each of its components. Start with senders and receivers. Did the sender and receiver speak the same language and share a body of knowledge and understanding that enable them to communicate effectively and efficiently? If not, what could they have done to improve the mutual understanding? See Chapter 12 for guidance on how to evaluate an audience. Message. Was the message clear and concise? Did it resonate with the receiver? Could the message be modified in any way to make it more effective? For example, maybe the presenter could have used more visual elements for examples. Channel. Was the communication channel used the best choice? Was the communication channel used the best choice for this message, audience, and situation? For example, if the message was communicated via email, would a phone conversation or a brief video conference have been more effective and efficient? See more in Chapter 4. Feedback. Was the feedback sufficient to reveal any lack of information or potential misunderstanding of the message? If feedback was insufficient, how could it have been improved? For example, some channels such as face-to-face and video conferencing are more conducive to feedback than others, such as email or texting. In some cases, simply encouraging an audience to ask questions can improve feedback. Context. Did anything about the context in which the conversation occurred impact the exchange of information or the ability to achieve a mutual understanding? Context can be anything from the space in which the conversation took place to the psychological state of one or more parties, to social or cultural differences, or even the relationship between the senders and the receivers. What impact, if any, did any of these contextual elements have on the conversation, and how could these elements have been addressed to improve the outcome? And noise. Did noise impact the ability of the parties to communicate? Remember that noise is more than a physical sound. It can be psychological, such as a mental distraction, hierarchical, due to differences in position or status, or semantic, due to the differences in languages or how people express themselves. If noise did impact the ability of the parties to communicate, how could that noise have been addressed to improve the exchange of information or ideas? Example. Suppose you've just finished a presentation to your manager in which you asked for a more flexible work schedule. You want to switch from 5 days in the office to 3 days in the office and two remote. You worked incredibly hard preparing your arguments. Your data was impeccable, your logic solid, your delivery flawless. You even made a killer proposal by appealing visual charts. Yet you didn't get the result you wanted. What happened? Well, go through the different elements I discussed in this chapter and try to figure it out. You were the sender, and your manager was the receiver. You had your presentation laid out and went in with guns blazing. Your manager listened but didn't say much. Maybe you could have benefited by encouraging more feedback. What else could have gotten in the way? The environment was comfortable. You went to your manager's office and sat together at a table. So that's probably not it. Could noise have played a role? Not that you're aware of. But your manager could have been feeling pressure from a supervisor to keep all employees on site, a form of hierarchical noise, and an outside factor that could have impacted how your request was received and processed. You didn't ask what your manager's reservations were after you received the verdict, so this factor is unknown. How about communication history? This may have been the most significant factor. By going in without first asking about your manager's history with people on the team working from home or their personal experiences working from home, you missed a key data point or multiple data points. This is likely where the communication went wrong. Next time, you'll know to gather more information ahead of time, and perhaps have more of a dialogue than a presentation. Remember, when communication fails, don't be ashamed. It happens to all of us. Learn from your mistakes and the mistakes of others, and use that insight to improve.